Hey there everybody, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to another episode of my best retro gaming bargains that I have found in the 5 or so years that I have been living in Japan. I have a little bit of a blocked nose today, so hopefully the sound quality is okay. Today I wanted to return back to games like I did in the very first episode and talk about a game that I found for the Super Famicom not long after I moved to Japan. In fact, within about 2 to 3 months of living here. So without further ado, let's find out what I found and what I paid for it. One of my very favourite genres is the shoot 'em up, or shmup as some people call them. And the thing with shmups is that they are very accessible to people who can't speak or understand Japanese, because in the main the actual gameplay itself is pretty straightforward. Yes, you might not be able to read or understand some of the cutscenes or the introduction, but usually they're a fairly accessible genre, and I think also they're a desirable genre regardless of their accessibility to non-Japanese speakers. And the reason I mention this is because this is one of the reasons that I think makes this quite an expensive genre of game to buy. Whether that's in Japan or outside of Japan, I think in general, well-made and enjoyable shmups actually do command a higher price than perhaps some other genres. But the fact still remains, I love playing them, and over the years that I've been living here, I've been able to find some really lovely boxed examples of some of my favourites. There's one game that still eludes me, which I'm sure some of you can probably work out, but that's Super Aleste. Anyway, without getting too distracted, I just wanted to set the scene. So yes, shoot 'em ups can be a bit expensive even in Japan, but there's one game which some of you will recognise on the TV, which is Axelay, and I really wanted to find a copy of this because whilst it's possibly not the most expensive shoot 'em up that you can find, hello harmful part for the PlayStation, Axelay does command a reasonable price in my home country of the UK. So when I came to Japan, I really wanted to find my own copy. But what I've found in the years that I've been here is that actually it's not that common. I don't often see it. So it was very lucky for me to find it within about 2 to 3 months of me living in Japan. I lived on the Sanriku coast up in Iwate Prefecture, which is Japan's second biggest prefecture by land area, but also one of the least populated, and yeah, it's pretty remote up there. Now, one of the benefits of that, it did mean that at the time I feel the prices that I was paying for games was much better than what you'd find in most areas of Japan. Now, whether that is still the case, I don't know. I've not lived there for almost 2 years now, but at the time it meant that finding games that I wanted for a reasonable price was actually, in hindsight, not that difficult. But one of the problems with living in such a remote place is obviously getting to a city of a decent size which actually has second-hand stores. So I lived in a city called Miyako, and the nearest city of any real size that had a branch of Hard Off, a couple of Book Offs, and some other second-hand stores was Morioka. And that took, at the time, about 2.5 hours to drive to, because it was a very long, quite treacherous in winter, mountain pass that gradually wound its way up to the head of the valley before dropping down into Morioka itself. And once you actually got there, like I say, there was a few second-hand stores. Now, to keep the story relatively short, I actually covered this in a video that I made for this channel about 5 years ago, so I'll put a link in this corner for you to go and check it out. But in one of the branches of Book Off in Morioka, very close to the cash registers, they had a very jumbled up collection of Super Famicom software, as well as Game Boy and perhaps other systems. And the reason that I mention that is because in the main, most stores will be organised by that Goju-onjun, the Japanese syllabary. But in this case, in this branch of Book Off, it was just piles of stuff. And when I say piles, it's like this was a pile of Super Famicom box software, and in these tubs was just loose cartridges. And so I think from that store I bought a copy of Super Mario Brothers collection. That's the All-Stars collection, which has the original Famicom Super Mario Brothers games on it, which is fantastic. They had some other games there. I can't remember now whether I bought any other box games from there. But I also dug through one of the big plastic tubs that had loose software in it. And in that box, I found a loose copy of Axelay. Now, in the time between that, I have actually found the box and also the manual for the game to make it a complete in-box copy as such. But at the time, I just found the cartridge only. So I decided, well, I'm happy to pay this price, so I just bought it. And I'm very glad that I did, because, like I say, not only is this a slightly more uncommon game to run into, but the price I paid for it is easily one of the very best bargains that I've ever found in Japan. I paid 100 yen plus tax, 110 yen in total for the game loose. It remains to this day, like I say, one of the very best gaming bargains that I've ever had in Japan. And honestly speaking, whilst I've had other good bargains here, they have not been sort of complete steals like that one. There has only ever been one other instance, which was actually this year, so a gap of over 4 years between me finding such an amazing bargain like that. And I'm going to talk about that other game later on in this series of videos. So yeah, for 100 yen plus tax, 110 yen in total, I found one of the very best shoot-em-ups for the Super Famicom. So now I want to help set some expectations for those of you who are coming to Japan potentially to buy some retro video games. Now I made a much longer video which goes into much more detail about this topic about 8 or 9 months ago, and I'll put a link up here and down in the description which will help you get a bit more detail on that situation. But in summary, I want to set some expectations. Now, I live pretty much in the middle of Nagoya, Osaka and Kyoto. I still live very much in rural Japan, very much the inaka, as you might hear sometimes said, but I have had a chance over the time that I've been living here to go into those cities and observe not just the pricing, but also the availability. And I think the availability is the biggest thing that has changed. I have generally noticed across the board that the breadth and range of software and also consoles has drastically gone down in the last 5 or so years. And that's not all just down to other people coming from overseas buying stuff. I think there's just generally been a bit of a renaissance and interest in the retro gaming scene within Japan itself in that time. And that has always been the case, but I think that it has been quite marked in the last 5 years. So for example, I have gone into branches of Surugaya in Nagoya, Osaka, Kyoto, both during the coronavirus pandemic when I first came here and also afterwards. And generally speaking, I have noticed that the stock and availability has really gone down, and I've noticed that across the board with most stores. The one exception to that I think is Super Potato, and the simple reason for that is that it's way overpriced. So generally speaking, it's quite unusual to find a game for what I would consider a reasonable price in those stores, and I think that's one of the reasons why it maintains its stock, because for most people, they're not willing to pay the prices that are being charged in there. So that's why you tend to find stores like Surugaya and one-off stores tend to have lower stock ranges, because generally they price their items a little bit fairer. Are they as good as bargains as you'll find on Mercari or on Yahoo auctions here in Japan? No, of course not. But like I said in the Tetris video that I made, you can still find excellent prices in stores like Surugaya. But as a result, in those big cities that are very popular with tourists, not just from overseas, but also within Japan, you'll find the availability has really gone down. So please don't get your heart set on walking into a store here and finding absolutely everything you ever wanted for 100 yen like I found this cartridge. As I said, I don't think I found another game for the Super Famicom for as good a price as I paid for Axelay. It's pretty uncommon to have that kind of experience, if I'm honest. Does that mean that you're not going to find good prices? Of course not. You're going to find some really wonderful games for amazing prices, certainly cheaper than what you'll be paying for in the US, in the UK, other countries in Europe, Australia and so forth. But of course, you do have to weigh that you might have a Japanese language accessibility issue with some of these games, and it might make them a little bit less easy to get into. But once you get familiar with them, I'm sure you'll have no problems with them. But yeah, for example, even games like, for example, Mario Kart Advance, you're going to have to learn how to navigate those menus to start with before you can actually really start thinking like, yeah, I know which option to choose for like the, you know, like the Grand Prix and all this kind of stuff. So do bear that in mind. But availability for some systems still remains fairly good. PlayStation, for example, including PlayStation 2, 3, 4 and so forth, is still very good. Saturn has always been a little bit hit and miss here in Japan. It's a sought after system, and same with PC Engine. You're certainly still going to find a lot of software for the Nintendo 64, the Super Famicom, the Game Boy and so forth, Famicom as well. But as I say, all the things that I mentioned about availability come into play there. And last, I just want to mention about pricing. Yeah, I think prices are generally rising in Japan for retro gaming stuff, particularly in stores like Hard Off, Surugaya, and so forth, yes, those have gone up in price. So expect to pay a little bit more than perhaps you might have paid 5 or so years ago if you came to Japan for your vacation. But that's pretty much all I can really say on that one. So yeah, Axelay, it's one of my favourite shmups for the Super Famicom. It's one that I've yet to complete yet, so I'm really hoping to spend a bit of time with this game in the coming months, probably over Christmas actually, and see if I can actually beat it, because I really do highly rate it. And I think actually the horizontal shoot 'em up stages in Axelay are better than the more famous vertical scrolling stages, but overall it's just Konami at its best. Peak Konami, as we all say. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know down in the comments what your favourite shoot 'em ups are, whether it's for the Super Famicom or for another system. And also, if you were coming to Japan, what games would you be looking out for, particularly in the shoot 'em up genre? I'd be really interested to hear what you're looking out for, because I might be able to give you a bit of advice on it. Anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you in another one of these. Take care. Bye-bye. Fuck me, that was so close.